Well, the time is just gone, 8 minutes past 8, and we kick off this morning looking at Iraq political crisis that has been unfolding in Iraq, and it has been there for a very, very long time. The latest development, protesters storming Parliament, and we joined this morning, Alhamdulillah, by the CEO and founder of the Cordoba Foundation, based in the United Kingdom, Dr. Anas Al Takriti. Dr. Anas, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Trust and hope you're going to be having a wonderful, a blessed Jum'ah, inshallah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, my dear brother Inayat, and to all your listeners and viewers today. It's a great time to be with you. A lot to unpack, of course, but alhamdulillah, today is Jum'ah, and it's the last Jum'ah of this year. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept it from us and to make the coming year one that is much, much better and blessed, inshallah, for everyone.
Inshallah, Ameen. And, year after year, Dr. Anas, and we've seen it for a long, long time now in the last, 15, 20 years, where we've seen so much evolving in the Muslim world. And unfortunately, it has actually gone pear-shaped. It's gone the other way. And we know after 9/11, we know what had happened was Iraq. And this is where it had basically gone even worse. And Iraq has been in a political crisis for a very, very long time. And before we take a look at the latest, the protests in Parliament, just look in Iraq and how things have developed over a period of time. Your thoughts, Dr. Anas?
What you described is absolutely correct. And whilst Iraq might be one of the most flagrant and one of the clearest examples of how deep the crisis that we suffer is, but actually we can look at probably every single Muslim country, every single Arab country, and look at a crisis in its own right. The main problem is that unfortunately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has tested our people with rulers who are incompetent, to say the very least. At times they are actually working for interests that do not serve the people. And in the case of Iraq, we had an invasion and an occupation of the country, and then an installment of a political system that wasn't born out of the people's struggle. And this is extremely important. Whenever we look at a place and seek outside help, we must bear in mind that ultimately a system will be installed that isn't born out of our own wishes, our own aspirations, our own values, our own cultures, and therefore will be an anomaly and something that is to the detriment of the people in the country. And unfortunately, this is exactly what's happened in Iraq. And therefore now, for 20 years, now this happened in 2003, if you recall. It's now nigh on 19 and a half years, almost 20 years coming upon us. And the country is moving from worse to worse. There's not even a shift towards it improving, and for that very reason. Unfortunately, we have a situation where there is an eruption of Shi'i infighting. I mean, the past 20 years have been marked by sectarian policies, by what we call in Arabic muhasasa, meaning that the Sunnis have this, the Shi'is have this, the Kurds have this, the Arabs have this, and it fragmented the country. But now what we have is a very serious Shi'i infighting, and Shi'is who have power. Either political power, meaning, for instance, the Sadr from one side who have won the elections, the elections that we had, by the way, 10 months ago, and since which we haven't had a government. So they actually won, and they have popular support. They have no less than 2 to 3 million who are willing to move at the behest and at the sign of their leader Muqtada Sadr. On the other side, we have Al-Maliki and his alliance, who have weapons and who have funds, money, and can mobilize and can destruct and can create havoc and the such. And therefore, we have a scenario in Iraq where the vast majority of Iraqis are looking to the situation, not knowing what's going to unfold, while the country is up in flames. It's a desperate situation, and unfortunately, it brings me no pleasure whatsoever to say that this was anticipated from the day one, from the very start. In fact, even before that, when we held the protests in London and across the world, including in South Africa, against the war in 2002, against the war in Iraq in 2003, with the million marches happening around the world, we told the world leaders back then that this will not end well. Removing Saddam and removing the regime and breaking up the country and occupying it and the such will bring devastation that is untold. We said that, but I have to confess, I never, ever, ever imagined that things would get this bad for this long.
Well, certainly, and it's amazing how time flies. And you mentioned 20 years already down the line, and we've seen how this country has degenerated to the extent that it has, Dr. Anas. And we know Saddam Hussein may not have been the ideal leader, but there was a level of control under his rule. And we've seen just the country descend into chaos, and it's only getting worse.
Yes. Let me let me make things very clear from my perspective. I always considered Saddam Hussein to be a brutal dictator. Myself, my family, for as long as I can remember, since I was born, we considered the Ba'athist regime to be a brutal dictatorship that the Iraqi people needed to struggle in order to change and to remove for one that is better. But when the time came and the Americans and the Brits under Tony Blair and George W. Bush announced that they will invade Iraq for the absolute lie of weapons of mass destruction, I stood against it, because that wasn't the way in which I wanted, my homeland to evolve. We shouldn't seek shortcuts. Building nations that are prosperous, that are successful, that achieve our ambitions and our aspirations takes hard work, takes a long time, takes a struggle. Just renting someone or calling on a major power to do it on my behalf will create the kind of chaos that we have on our hands right now. So, and whilst I was opposed to Saddam Hussein and the Ba'ath regime, but at the same time, I have to admit that there was a country, at least. There was a country that had its ministries, that had its sectors that were working to various degrees. Iraq was the pride of the region in terms of the healthcare that it provided, the education that it provided. I know that Gulf countries such as the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, they used to pride themselves that their ministers were educated in Iraq's universities during the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So I have to admit this right now. I have absolutely nothing. I don't even have a semblance of a society. Today, we look at each other with great suspicion. The sect that we belong to, either Sunnis or Shiites, defines our relationship with each other. And there is absolutely no meaning to being Iraqi today. You have to follow it up with a suffix saying whether you're a Kurd or an Arab or a Sunni or a Shi'i. Otherwise, being an Iraqi means absolutely nothing. And people will continue. It's a situation that is extremely tragic, and it's devastating. The numbers of lives that have been lost since the invasion and occupation are untold. We don't know, and we might never ever know, simply because we don't know who the culprit is, who was killed, when, where, how, why. No one knows any of this. And the government, if there is such a thing, is incapable of even documenting how people lose their lives. So we have a situation that we can spend hours talking about how devastating it is. But ultimately speaking, I think that we must start to talk about the lessons learned from Iraq for the sake of other nations, for the sake of other countries that might be, God forbid, going down the same route. Change needs to happen at the behest of the people of that nation who care about it the most, through their struggle, through their strife, through educating their young ones so that they carry on the beacon of the struggle. And then we arrive at a situation where we are all, each and Every one of us individually is responsible for the situation that we have arrived at, because it was born out of our struggle, not of anyone else's.
Well, certainly, Dr. Anderson. Also, talking of taking lessons, and we see Libya, which is a classic example of the route that Iraq obviously has gone, and exactly the same developments when one looks at what is taking place in Libya. But we must not also forget, and you point out that looking at Iraq, which was the pride of the Middle East, had the most highly educated population in the Middle East, and also going back, looking at the legacy of Iraq, looking at Baghdad, the seat of the Khilafah, and the rich Islamic history and the value that Baghdad had actually added to the Muslim world.
Of course, I mean, when we're talking about, it's absolutely, heartbreaking that we look at this region, we look at Baghdad and we look at Damascus. Those two cities provided the entire world with the very basis of what today we know as the scientific and technological eruption and evolution that the world is going through. The very basis of that was founded in the libraries and the research houses of Baghdad and of Damascus. The fact that you read in manuscripts available in various cities here around me, in Oxford and in London libraries and the such, that in order to be acknowledged as a scientist, you had to have visited Baghdad. You have to have attended some of the lessons in the libraries of Baghdad. In fact, in order to elevate your status as a scholar in whatever field it is, you had to know a little bit of Arabic. You read about this and it's as though we're watching some sort of Disney fantasy, sci-fi, whatever it is. But it was true, and it was true not for a blip of time, for centuries. It was true. But sadly, once again, this also tells us, and the name of my organization, the Cordoba Foundation, and I am absolutely in love with Andalusia. And I try to visit Cordoba particularly, as well as Granada and Toledo and Seville, as much as I can. You go there and you see wonders, absolute wonders, things that have you aghast, mesmerized as to how these were constructed, how these were built, the civilization that engulfed, the southern part of Europe and influenced all of Europe in art and philosophy and mathematics and all sorts of sciences, and art and design and aesthetics and the like. And yet it crumbled and it fell in such a manner that that grips you in terms of wonder as to how grand you can build a construct. But once it becomes vacant from the inside, once you lose the substance and you pay attention only to the shell, you crumble and fall. And therefore, neither Baghdad nor Cordoba, in all the majesty that they arrived at, were capable to withstand the repercussions of losing the very essence of how these great civilizations were built.
Dr. Anas, we're going to put you on hold. We're going to just play out one or two ads. We'll be back with you in a minute.
Listen to Salam Media.
The Syrian crisis has raged for over 4,000 days. 4,000 days of suffering, displacement, hunger, and intolerable insecurity. With your help, Islamic Relief can continue to stand alongside them. Never has your support been so important. Together, we can stand with the Syrian people. We can help them build a better future. Will you continue to stand with the people of Syria? Please, donate now.
There's no smell that takes me back to the comfort of my childhood than the smell of black seed oil being applied by my nanny. Now I'm using tib black seed in my own home to soothe sniffles and coughs, to help with digestion and immunity, and of course, as part of my beauty routine. After all these years, I've come to appreciate the wisdom in finding comfort and shifa in trusted treatments like Tib Black Seed. You can find Tib Black Seed at all leading pharmacies or find out more at blackseed.co.za.
Ah, the kitchen, the heart of the home, where memories are made and celebrated. Our go-to place for those freshly stacked pancakes early in the morning or for that late-night snack munchies. We are in there together, cooking, eating, and celebrating life together. Let's keep the kitchen a place that is shared by everyone, where we build stronger bonds and grow together. Sunfoil, now we cooking. Visit nowwecooking.co.za for recipes that everyone can help make.
Rejuvenating media day by day. This is Salam Media.
At 8:23 a.m., we continue with news and views this morning, and our big picture story this morning is taking a look at Iraq and talking to Dr. Anas Al-Takriti, CEO and founder of the Cordoba Foundation. Dr. Anas, just to continue the discussion now, central to this latest crisis is obviously the leadership. And we spoke briefly about Muqtada al-Sadr, and also we're talking about Maliki. And just looking at these two personalities, and what they are actually hoping to achieve through this crisis that has been created, and to give us an overview on these personalities, because we know at one point in time you said it's Shia versus Shia, and there was a time under Saddam Hussein where basically, although it was majority Shia, but the country had a level of I would say peace. We never, we never had the Sunni Shia debate playing out until we had the the Iraq war as well. But it actually features more prominently after the invasion of Iraq, after Saddam Hussein was removed from power. And when one looks at all these personalities like Maliki, Muqtada al-Sadr that have been involved over a period of time.
Let me start from the top, Brother Inayat. Just to amend, I wouldn't say correct, but amend some of what you said. Partly about, for instance, the majority were Shi'i. We have no evidence of this. And even if you had said with a majority of Sunnis, I would have said the same thing. We had no evidence of this for a simple reason, that the last census, the population count that happened in Iraq happened in the early 70s, so something like 50 years ago. And in that population, we didn't have a question about anyone's religion or sect. And therefore, we have no idea. I mean, we have guesses. Probably people in their own institution or area or the such, they did a count, and therefore they have an idea about their own area. But on the nation level, we have absolutely no idea. However, in order for the invasion, for the occupier to hold grips, they needed to play on fraction lines within society. They need to. This is one of the rules of how to take control of another land, to play on the fraction lines. Those fraction lines might be race, might be class, might be sect, might be, whatever they are, professions. They play on these in order to have people against people, and their attention is taken away from opposing the occupier. So the invasion in 2003 played on these, I would say, fabrications. I'm not sure. It's possible that the Shias were a majority. It's also possible that they weren't. But to play on them and assert them as a fact, and then to claim that you're there in order to support the majority who are overwhelmed by a minority government, is essentially a lie. It's baseless. So we start from that. We start from the fragmentation of a society that was by far and large all united in facing an oppressor. We had hundreds of thousands of Iraqi families intermarrying, Muslims and Christians, as well as Sunnis and Shias. I myself, I come from an Arab Sunni, purely Arab Sunni area of Iraq. Yet after 2003, and after I was, by the BBC, I was called in for the very first time in my life as an Iraqi Arab Sunni. And I was startled. I was taken aback. I had never, ever in my entire life been introduced this way. I went back and sat with my father and said, how many, do we have any members of our family who are Shia? It turns out that my maternal uncle is married to a Shia lady. My paternal aunt is married to a Shia doctor. We have Shi'is in our family. This was never regarded as an issue. And this, I would suggest, was across Iraq. This was true across Iraq. But we arrived at a state after 2003 where being either a Sunni or a Shi'i or an Arab or a Kurd was definitive. It defined you, and you needed to hold on to your own tribe. And this created the calamity, or the beginnings of the calamity, that then engulfed the entire country and designated Iraq as a failed state. And now we're facing the prospects of a mighty civil war upon all the calamities that have hit Iraq over the past 20 years. Essentially, Maliki and Sadr want what every political leader wants, and that is power. And even if they have power, they want more power. If it's, and this power is for various reasons. It's for authority. It's because of self-preservation. For instance, I would go as far as to claim that al-Maliki, who has sufficient funds to not only maintain him for the rest of his life, but maintain millions of people for the rest of their lives. I mean, having benefited from billions over the time of his rule and since, and who has command of tens of thousands of people fully armed, militias ready to go at his behest. So what kind of extra power does he need? The fact of the matter is, I would say that al-Maliki essentially knows that if he was ousted of power, if for some reason his political immunity was taken away, even for one single day, there would be thousands after him, legally, in courts, probably even physically, because of what he has done, because of his legacy. Don't forget that he was prime minister for about 8 years. And during those 8 years, Iraq suffered the worst sectarian atrocities, division and infighting and the such. There are, I would suggest, as far as millions of Iraqis who hold al-Maliki personally responsible for their losses, for the deaths of their loved ones and the such. Muqtada Sadr has popular support. He has the legacy of a Sadr family, and he wants to carry on that legacy. And unfortunately, we're caught in this trap. I mean, for instance, me as an Iraqi, millions of others in my situation, albeit that they are so caring about the future of Iraq, they have nothing. There is nothing that they could do. Nothing, absolutely. Why? Because we've been sidelined. We've been sidelined because of sectarian issues. Now, I can't speak to them. I can't send a message to al-Maliki saying, please fear Allah, or, have some heart for the country. I can't say that because I'm of a different sect. So I don't really matter. In fact, I'm seen as someone who is, someone who's now happy that there is Shi'i infighting, and that I am going to utilize and capitalize on this opportunity in order to pounce and take. It's a ridiculous scenario, but unfortunately, it's the scenario that we face, and which might erupt into a full-blown civil war, which I have absolutely no idea how that will pan out.
Also, Dr. Anas, what is even more a ridiculous scenario is to look at those who had basically supported and facilitated the invasion. And in this case, I would like to refer to the likes of Saudi Arabia, for instance, who made their military bases available to the United States to basically attack Iraq, and knowing fully well that you're going to have a Shia government in Iraq. Yet on the other side, one sees the hypocrisy when we see the actions of Saudi Arabia in Yemen, for instance. We see the standoff between Iraq and Saudi Arabia. And so all of this, at the end of the day, doesn't just make sense. It doesn't add up, Dr. Anas.
You're absolutely right. I don't exonerate a single country in the region of some level of responsibility in what's happened to Iraq. There are some that are directly involved in inflaming the situation, making it worse. I would include Iran in that. There are those who have utterly failed failed, miserably failed in even playing by their own national interest. The likes of Saudi Arabia, the likes of the Gulf of the GCC and the like, and the such. Turkey has a responsibility that it could have played a far more positive role in Iraq than it actually has. And so on. I mean, not a single neighboring country, regional country, is exempt from being responsible for what's happened in Iraq. And ultimately, every single one of them now is facing the backlash of the failure or the evilness of their policies within Iraq. In the case of Saudi Arabia, unfortunately, we have a country that has almost infinite resources, infinite riches, that has the capacity to become a superstate, not only in the region but on the world level. But unfortunately, and this is something which again is a lesson for the generations, because the leadership is not legitimately elected by its people. It needs to support itself by a power that sustains it. And unfortunately, in the case of undemocratically elected leaderships, they seek the support of either the Americans or some other major power. That's where they derive their legitimacy. And once you derive your legitimacy from a foreign power, your decisions aren't going to be yours. They're not going to be in your own interest. You're going to have to wait for green lights in order to make a move, in order to make a stand. And therefore, once Saudi Arabia was told, not asked, not advised, or sought the advice of, but told that it was to receive military bases in order to launch the attack on Iraq, it had no place to discuss or to argue or to negotiate. It just had to say yes. And hence it became complicit in what's happened to Iraq. And what's worse, it paid the bill. And this makes it such a disgraceful sort of picture that we paint of a state that had the ability and the capacity to become, and especially Saudi Arabia, housing the two holy sites of Islam, being, the place where 1.7, 1.8, probably 2 billion people see as their spiritual homeland. A power that you can't even put into figures and assign a dollar sign to. It's so immeasurable. It's so immeasurable. But yet we find Saudi Arabia engulfed in needless, unnecessary, wasteful escapades, such as the one that you mentioned in Yemen, such as the absolutely inept policy towards Iraq, which is on its border, and supporting other dictators, because a dictator can only do that, can only support other dictators. A dictator can't and will not ever support a democratic move by the people, because that way they would be delegitimizing their own standard. So a dictator supports another dictator, and the billions that Saudi Arabia used in order to support or give succor to the likes of a Sisi and is just absolutely disgraceful. It's tragic. It's very, very sad, because the potential of what could have happened is unimaginable. Seriously, this could have been the very center of world excellence in science, in technology, in endeavor, in entrepreneurship, in everything. But unfortunately, it became the very center for dictatorships, for authoritarian regimes, for violence, for bloodshed, for killing, and the spiral goes on.
Well, Dr. Anas, there's just so much I think you and I can actually talk about, and, you've raised so many more issues that we could have more detailed discussion on. But unfortunately, time is of the essence, and we have run out of time. But as always, we appreciate you taking time out, talking to us here on Salam Media, and we wish you well, inshallah, you, your family as well. And we continue making dua. It is a day of Jummah as well. We continue making dua for the well-being of the Ummah at large, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaykum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you very much, my dear brother Inayat. We'll speak, inshallah, again very, very soon. And assalamu alaikum and congratulations on the new year to all your listeners and viewers. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dr. Anas Al Takriti with us this morning on Iraq. The time is just gone 8:37. We're going to go for a quick break. We come back. We'll be talking with the Minara Chamber of Commerce when we get back.